children or daughters or whatever. Huh? Yeah. Yeah. Solomon Maimon was a Polish Jew who had studied Talmud and things like that. You find the excerpt here in this Jewish book here, history here, in page 34 onward. And he published an autobiography, and here he gives some excerpts from it. And I'd just like to read you this a little bit here if I can, although it may be too long. It looks like it is too long. But I'll read a bit. My return to Hamburg was agreeable, but here I fell in circumstances of the deepest distress. I lodged in a miserable house, had nothing to eat, did not know what to do. I had grown too enlightened to return to Poland, to spend my life in misery without rational occupation or society, and to sink back in the darkness of superstition and ignorance, from which I had hardly delivered myself with so much labor. He was one of these Jews who began to cultivate Western culture. On the other hand, I could not count on success in Germany owing to my ignorance of the language, as well as the manners and customs of the people, to which I had never yet been able to adapt myself properly. I had learned no particular profession. I had not distinguished myself in any special science. I was not a master of any language which could make myself perfectly intelligible. It occurred to me, therefore, that for me there was no alternative left but to embrace the Christian religion and get myself baptized in Hamburg. But even there, he was not, he tried to do it, I think. He says, I am a native of Poland, he wrote this letter, belonging to the Jewish nation, destined by my education to be a rabbi. But in the thickest darkness, I have perceived some light. And I guess he writes this letter to try to convert to Christianity. So that's a really interesting description there. And the pastor, I think, who he sends it to on page 36 says to him, you are too much of a philosopher, the pastor said, to be able to become a Christian. Reason has taken the upper hand with you, and faith must accommodate itself to reason. You hold the mysteries of the Christian religion to be mere fables, and its commands to be mere laws of reason. For the present, I cannot be satisfied with your confession of faith. You should therefore pray to God that he may enlighten you with his grace and endow you with the spirit of true Christianity, and then you can come back to me. If that's the case, I said to the pastor, I must confess that I am not qualified for Christianity, whatever light I might receive. So this is a really interesting little autobiographical incident. And he goes on about his life in Germany, ups and downs, I guess. Here on page 38, there's an actual description of a meeting with Mendelssohn. On my arrival in Berlin, I called upon Mendelssohn, as well as other old friends, and asked them, as I had now acquired some knowledge of languages, to employ me in some occupation. They hit upon the suggestion that in order to enlighten the Polish Jews still living in darkness, I should prepare in Hebrew, as the only language intelligible to them, some scientific works, which these philanthropists would then print at their own expense and distribute among the people. The proposal I accepted with alacrity, but now the question arose, what sort of work should a beginning be made? On this point, my excellent friends were divided in their opinions. One thought that the history of the Jewish nation would be the most serviceable for such purposes, inasmuch as the people would discover in it the origin of their religious doctrines and of the subsequent corruption which they had undergone. They would come to understand the fall of the Jewish state, as well as the subsequent persecution and oppression which the Jews had suffered, had arisen from their own ignorance and in opposition to all rational planning. According to this gentleman, recommend I translate someone's history of the Jews from French. This specimen gave satisfaction to all, even to Mendelssohn. I was ready to take the work in hand. But one of our friends thought we ought to begin with something on natural religion and rational morality, inasmuch as this is the object of all enlightenment. Accordingly, he recommended for that purpose I translate the natural religion of Reimarus. You guys probably haven't even read or heard of that work. But you see, they were in the grips of this new age in Europe. I'll go back to it in a second. This, what we call the Age of Enlightenment. The Enlightened Age, the 16 and 1700s, when Europe itself supposedly was undergoing an enlightenment. The bottom of 39, he goes on, once again I fell out with my friends in Berlin. In this dispute, Mendelssohn remained neutral because he thought that both parties had right on their side. Again, you'll have to read the excerpt yourself if you want to read it deeper to find out what the argument was really about. So I became impatient and resolved to quit Berlin once more and go to Breslau, which is further east towards Poland in Germany. I took with me some letters of introduction, but they were of little service, and so on. Irritated by my disheartening situation, I resolved to form the acquaintance of Christian scholars, by whose recommendation I thought I might find a hearing among the wealthy men of my own people. And so he describes how that went. Then he finally ends up on 41. At last, my situation in Breslau also grew precarious, and he explains to some extent why. So he returns to Berlin. I'm just skipping through here. When I came to Berlin, Mendelssohn was no longer alive, and my former friends were determined to know nothing more of me. So you see, for them to get along in these places, they needed someone always to help them. They needed someone to vouch for them, to protect them. I had now resolved to study Kant, 42's Critique of Pure Reason, of which I had often heard, but which I had never seen. The method by which I studied this work was quite peculiar. Such is properly the process which is called thinking oneself into a system. But as I'd already mastered Spinoza, Hume, Leibniz, and so on, I was naturally led to think a system that would synthesize them all. And so, I thought I found this in the Critique of Pure Reason and so on. So he starts studying Kant, and now you and I probably haven't even studied Kant to the extent that would be sufficient for this period here. Finally, bottom of 43, I'm skipping through here, just to give you the feel for this. A number of young Jews from all parts of Germany had united during Mendelssohn's lifetime to form a society under the designation Society for Research into the Hebrew Language. They correctly observed that evil condition of our people, morally as well as politically, had its source in their religious prejudices, in their want of rational exposition of the Holy Scriptures. Accordingly, the object of their society was to remove these deficiencies, to study the Hebrew language sources, and by that means to introduce rational exposition. For these purposes, they resolved to publish a monthly in Hebrew under the title Ha'ma'aseh, the Collector, which was to present the expositions of difficult passages in Scripture, Hebrew poems, prose essays, translations from useful works, and the like. The intention of all this certainly was good, but that the end would scarcely be reached by any such means I saw from the beginning. I was too familiar with the principles of the rabbis and their style of thought to believe that such means would bring about change. So here's, even in Judaism, we have the problem, or they were facing the problem, of the rabbis versus the people who wanted to go forward to a more enlightened, liberal sort of approach to life. The Jewish people, aside from accidental modifications, is a perpetual aristocracy under the appearance of a theocracy. The learned men who form the nobility have for many centuries been able to maintain their position as